Okay, let's go.
So we're trying to compare two companies. So first we were looking at the prices.
If you speak
So-
louder, they can be able to hear you.
So we were looking at two companies, the prices of the stock of two companies on the market. So the comparison will be based on 5 cases. We have like one case where all the prices are increasing.
Can you
for
speak
companies.
louder? Can you speak louder? Yeah, you can speak louder so I can hear you.
So we were trying to compare two companies, right? So we were looking at the prices of those two companies. So he mentioned like 5 cases. The first case was both of the companies' stock market prices was going up, and the second case was like both of the company stock market were going down, and the third case was like one was going up while the second one was going down, and the last one was like one was going down and the second one was going up. So those are the cases we can find in this we can compare those companies with. So after choosing our case, like whether the prices, both of the prices are going up or down, we have to look at the percentage of the change and the dollar, the dollar, I mean the price of the market. So he mentioned like one case like uh, one stock was worth $1,000, and the second case was 10 stocks was worth like $1,000. So we try to make a comparison like if we buy if like the percentage was like increased by 10%. So if you have one stock of the first company which is worth $1,000, and you buy 10 stock of the company was where the stock market were worth like $100. So basically the change was like slightly like was not that much if you look at it deeper. So he was using the Excel file to try to go deeper with the chart, because like by looking at the chart on the newspaper, we can like really see what's going on actually. So we have to go deeper. We have to make a deep analysis with the data. So he mentioned the trends, the trend lines, how we can use the trends, how we can use the trend lines to make a deep analysis of yeah, like the trend. And after we have we use okay, we use a separate scale, and after we use the same scale, how we can use those tricks to figure out what's going on. Because if we use the same scale or the different scale for those data, we can be lost. So it's better to use the same scale to have a better look and understanding of the data.
Good. Okay, Victor, tell us what you understood.
All right, so this is what I got. So you made a comparison of two companies and several cases of this, and you analyzed several cases in which the stocks of these two companies were either both going up, both going down, the first one was going up, the second one was going down, or the first one was going down and the second one was going up. You evaluated the percentage of the change in the price of the stock, and I think what he meant was the dollar value of that change, of that percentage, how much that percentage meant in dollars, in money. Then, and this is okay, so you used candlestick charts and candlestick graphs to do a deeper analysis of these fluctuations, and also you analyze if for a set amount of money it was better to get one stock, obviously costing much, than getting several stocks, each one of them costing less. That's what I gathered.
Okay. So what did he get? Right stuff? Everything or not?
We didn't get everything. The trains.
Good. Let's go on and do a review. What did we say before? We learned how to make a graph. The first graph we made is this one. The first graph we make is this one. And this is the graph I want you to be able to make. That is an automated made graph using the stocks where we put volume, close, open, high, and low price of the stock. From this graph, I eliminated the volume. I made it an adjustment to the scale. In a minute, I have another graph, but I have the candlestick graph. If I had a minute to go from one graph to the other, I'll give you double of my time, 2 minutes. I'll give you double of 2 minutes and an extra minute. In 5 minutes, you need to be able to do it. Then we went and we made other graphs. The graph that we made is the graph that gives you the two stocks at the same time. From that particular graph, we added a trend line. And I went to discuss what is the meaning of a trend line and what is the R square and the equation that we get. From the equation, the main point is the slope of the line. The R square is how much faith we have to that line. If R square is close to 1, or the more close to 1 R square is, the better value that line gives it to us. If the R square is less than 50%, less than 60%, less than 75%, then we do not have much faith on the meaning of the slope, because there are a lot of things going up and down. From this graph, we use copy and paste. We made adjustments to the graph. We got into a graph that we said we would like to present. The reason we said we like to present this graph is because it gives me a very vivid information about how the stocks are going up and down. Although, because the stocks that are going up and down are in a different scale, I asked a question, which is a tricky question. The trend line of these two stocks is having an intersection point, or not? And what is the meaning of an intersection point? After that, you would prefer one stock from the other, or you will make more in one stock of the other. And the answer is, Vanessa, do they have an intersection point? They don't, because here you look at them as if they're on the same scale. If you look at them in a similar scale, they do not have an intersection point. And if you have one of these graphs, then you can be able to make several of them. The best way to do it, the most efficient way to do it, if you graph the two of them together, and then from that point, do whatever you like, and start eliminating the remaining of the part that you don't want to show. And we go to the last part. The last part that I want to discuss is when things are going up and down in terms of a percentage. And I want to know what is a percentage. How do I calculate these percentages? I go back to my line and I want to see what is happening. So what did we do? We got the data from Yahoo Finance. We specify data for a particular period and particular frequency. We click done and we click update. We have the data done. We downloaded the data and we got an Excel file. That Excel file does not record, does not save formulas and data. That Excel file, whenever we want to do it, is Excel file that I go on and I want to save it. And as I save that file, I decide what type of a file I have. That file we saw is a CSV file, which is a comma delimiter file. If I save everything in here, I will get a notification that I would lose the multiple seats and I would lose all the formulas that I have. I would like to test it. I will go back and I will save. I go on and I want to save that file in the desktop. I will change my name. I will put that as a test. And I will change the format. And as I change the format, this is what I have. If I click OK, everything that says I would lose, it's going to be lost. I click it, and I want to see what is happening. I want to keep that format. I'm out of it. I save it. I don't want to replace it. Let's say I want to replace it. I want to keep this format. Yes. And I have this file. This file that I open does not have any of the graphs that I have here. This graph that I open has information that previously used to have formulas, but now there are not formulas. This information here used to be formula information. Now this information is numbers, and I do not have that information as a formula. Is this clear? What do I lose? I lose all the additional files, and in the file I have, I lost all the formulas that I had before, which means if I put new data, it would not give me an additional information. I don't want to save any changes. I would leave everything it's there. I go back into my computer and I take the file that I had before. The file that I had before now has a different way that it looks. This is a worksheet file. This is a comma delimiter file. Why do I need this file here? Because this file has data that I do analysis, and that particular analysis is based on data that if I want to now do two more different type of work, I would not have to repeat my work again. I go on and I want to get data. Vanessa, where do I go to get data? I go to Yahoo Finance, and as I'm in Yahoo Finance, I want to go on and take the data for AT&T. I want to do the same analysis I did before. And I want to compare, let's say, General Electric to AT&T. In order to do that, I go to the historical data. I specify my data for the same period. And I specify my data for the same frequency. Which is the frequency that we got for the year?
Weekly.
Weekly. We apply and we have the same data. We take the data and we download the data. Now we have a new data set. That data set has information about AT&T. I take this particular file and I look at it. It starts from 11/19/2018, same period here. It goes to 11/18/2019, same period here. The data I have is a data about volume, a data about open, high, low, and close. If I take the data for AT&T, if I take the data for AT&T and I put them here, instead of Coca-Cola, now I will put AT&T. I paste the data. Instead of Coca-Cola, I'll put AT&T. I paste my data here. I see is the data exactly the same. Here I do not have information, which means I need to make an adjustment on that part. Then I need to go and take open, high, low, and close. All the data that I have here. I take the data, I copy it, I go on, and I paste it. I have new different types of data now. Now I compare to other companies. General Electric to AT&T. What do I have here? As soon as I put the data here, the formula picks up the new data that I have, which means that I increase my productivity. If someone is starting from the beginning, you have to take more time. Now you have the data here. Instead of Coca-Cola, now I have AT&T. Instead of Coca-Cola, I have AT&T. And I move on. Instead of Coca-Cola, I have AT&T. The data from here are in my other files. I go to my other files and I see what is happening here. What do I have? That's the General Electric. The General Electric is what we had before. If I want to make the AT&T data, I would be able to go on and see. What do I have here in this graph? Before I had close values of General Electric and Coca-Cola. Right now, I have General Electric and AT&T. And I have a tricky question, not tricky, common sense question. Why don't I see the AT&T here? I have General Electric and AT&T.
Adjust for the AT&T scale.
This one is adjusted. It takes the data from a previous area. So this is what I have before. This is what I had before. Is the same line as it was for Coca-Cola or a different information now?
Different.
That's a different thing. How much time it took me to do it? Which means I go back. The book in one chapter tells you how to deal with one stock. Then in few chapters later tells you how to deal with two stocks. If I want to do with 3, 4, 5 stocks, do I need to spend 5 times more the time, or I will just drag things more? And this is what I would like you to be able to pay attention. I go into my graphs. I go into the graph, and I want to look at the percent change of the graph. The percent change of the graph is the graph that gives me information about how things change. What did we say we want to do?
Sir, can we Can you please tell us how you got the percentage graph again, like process?
Good, I have Sila here. How do I get the percent change?
Percent change, net change over the preview price.
The graph?
What do I have?
The net change.
I have to compare two prices. Now I have to compare the closing price of AT&T from 1 week to the other week. This is what I need to look at. What is happening to the price? Increases or decreases? From 29 becomes 31. What do we want to do? We want to subtract one from the other and see how much is that increase. That increase is $1.88. Then I want to compare that increase with what was the price the previous week. And if I compare the change of the price to the price of the previous week, I have the percent change. What is the percent change? Percent change is the difference between 2 weeks or 2 days related to what is the starting point. In other words, if I want to make everything here, do I need all the information, or I just need to have formatted these particular cells and drag things down? And if instead of having things in weeks, I have things in days, what do I need to do? Here I have the analysis for a year weekly, right? If I want to have the analysis for the year daily, and you are the managers, and I had to work for you, how many minutes would you let me work and be paid for that?
As little as possible.
And as little as possible means what? One thing you need to do is you need to go here and make the adjustment. One thing is you click the daily, you apply, and you have the daily data. If you have the daily data for whatever I have here, AT&T, I put a download file. This file, T1, has the AT&T for the daily data. What else do I want to do? I want to get the General Electric. I changed the companies. What do I want to do? I want to get the daily data for that part. I apply it, I have it. I have everything download. These two files are giving me the information in terms of what it needs to be done. I go on to this one and I take the data I need. What do I need? I need to take the days. Now the days are not week by week, it's a day by day, which means I have 360 points. Why don't I have 360 and I have 251?
Because you don't trade on weekends.
I don't trade on weekends. So what do I need to do? I need to take the time period I have. I copy it and I go to my file that I kept everything together. And in that particular file, I put the information that I have here as dates. I go on and look at the dates are here. Next thing I want to do is to do what? I want to go to my file. I am here in my file. Reopening? No. I need to have that file. I need to be in the AT&T file that I have the dates and I have the information of the volume. I put the volume for AT&T and I go and see what is happening here. Now the AT&T is volume. I check it. Is the volume of the AT&T the same as the dates? It is. What do I need to have? I need to have the same days. Do I have them? I drag it down and I have the same days. What else I need to have? From the AT&T file,
I love close and
I need to take the close and columns. I take them, I paste, I have it done, and it's done. How much time you needed?
Few minutes, couple of minutes.
Okay, if you need few minutes, I'll give you 3 times the time to do it for the first time today at home. If you do it couple times at home, then you learn how to make the adjustments and be able to move and do whatever you need. What do I want you to tell me? I want you to tell me how things are related. So what do you have here is how things change in terms of the percentages. When this is happening, one trick I want you to do is to take the horizontal axis information from whatever is here and put it as a label, not next to the axis, but at the low part of the axis. So you will have it clear. And this tells you how things change throughout a period of time. But I want to see something else. Do they move together in the same direction? I go back to my data. And as if I'm in my data, I go on and see what do I have. I have this information here. General Electric and AT&T, as they change weekly their closing price. I want to insert a graph, and I want to see how things are related. Which graph do I want to see? This part of this type of a graph, XY graph, tells you how things change. This type of a graph gives you a vivid idea of what is the R squared. If the numbers are scattered, the R square is weak. If the numbers are very close to each other, the R square is strong. This is the graph that you want to make. I take that graph, I use my technique, and my technique is I'll cut my graphs from here, and I'll put my graphs all together, so I will have all of my graphs. This is the graph that I need to see. Instantly, I make colors in the graph so I can see everything in a professional way. Second thing, I take whatever is next to the axis and I will put it at the low point that moves that information outside of my graph. And I have my scatter case. What this means? That means that I have a point here. I have a point here. This particular point says that when one stock increases 15% and 33 points, the other one increases 5%, which means there is an area that both stocks increase together. There is another area that both stocks decline together. There is an area, this is the area that one stock, the first column, increases while the second column declines. And this area here is the area where the first column declines and the second column increases. So here I have all the points as how they change. if I insert a trend line here, that particular trend line gives me a different information. And this particular trend line tells me what is happening with the correlation between these two parts. Already I brought one concept that you learn in statistics. And the concept that you learn in statistics is the correlation. And several of you already took statistics. Several of you already took statistics. And I took statistics the first time, and I failed. And I took statistics the second time, and I passed it, but I didn't understand it. And I took statistics the third time. Then I learned it. From that time, I remember it. Correlation means what? And this is what I want you to learn in my class. Correlation means what? I'll ask not all of you, I will ask Victor. Correlation, Victor will say, is how you will have a relationship of two things. Correlation is how two things are related. But in order to know how two things are related, I know to know how the two things behave. And if I want to know how the two things behave, I want to know what is the average and what is the variance of each one of these two things. And I will ask you the question, and the thing that I don't want you to tell me is what is the statistical definition of the average and the variance. But I want you to know how you understand what is average and what is variance. And if you know what is average and variance, then we can go on to what is the correlation. But from variance, Victor would say, hi Kenya, what is the standard deviation? Or in other words, when you take the 2 train and you are at Penn Station and you want to go to your class on time, what is the expected frequency that that train comes to Penn Station? And is it the same in the morning at 7 o'clock as it is in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, or there is a difference? And when is the train on time? Now, when I take the schedule from Long Island Rail in order to come here in the morning, they say if the train is a minute or 2 late, is considered to be on time. And that's fine with me. But I want to go to the station, and if the train leaves at 7 o'clock, I don't want to go 7 o'clock and the train to be left a minute before 7 o'clock. Because if it's on time a minute late, I don't want it to be on time a minute early. Because I need to be there on time. But if the variation that is expected is just a minute late but not a minute early, then I can be able to get into the train when I get it there. Is this clear? And this is what I want to know in how I would apply this in finance. And what do we have in finance? We have 2 stocks that they change from a day to day or from a week to week. Here they change from a week to week. And as they change from the week to week, the percent change is increasing. And as the percent change is increasing, I see because the trend that I have here is going up. But what I see is very scattered. If I select 2 other stocks, look at the videos we took yesterday, look at the way that Apple is related to Google, the graph is completely different. Because Apple and Google have much closer relationship than AT&T and General Electric. Which means you can have more forecastable results. While here, it's not that strong. So, I'm giving you the ideas for next week, and I want you to be able to tell me. Victor would say that variance is something that he can calculate in order to find out what is the standard deviation. And Victor would say that variance and standard deviation, more or less, they tell you the same thing in a different scale.
Yeah, I think the variance is the square root of standard.
Correct. One is the square of the other, or the other is the square root of the first. So it's the same thing. The scale is different. Why we need to play with the scale is my question. So, and I have a question. Sultan told me about the difference of the scale. Why do I need to have a different scale? Any idea, Sultan?
Sorry, what do you have?
Because I want my average to be expressed in the same scale with the change. And standard deviation is the same scale as it is the average, while the variance is the scale squared. But if I have two things, then I get something that is similar to variance, it's similar to variance, but a little bit different than the variance. Because if I have two things, then I will have what is known as covariance. And what is covariance? Covariance is when two things change. It's the same thing as variance, but now I don't have one, I have two. And I go to whatever I want to go. I want to see what is correlation. Correlation is how two things are related. Correlation is how two things are related. And I want you to go into your, not in your statistical book, into your finance book and find out the formula for correlation. How two things are related. And it says, two things are related the way that two things can change together. But then I want to take two things change together and find out how one thing changes on its own, multiply how another thing is changing of its own. So if I have one stock, General Electric, if I have one stock, General Electric, and I have another stock, AT&T. I want to see how General Electric and AT&T change in terms of their price separately. And I want to see how these two change in terms of a price together, General Electric and AT&T. And if I know that, I know how they change together, I know how they change together, and I know how they change separately, I want to compare. How do I compare? How do I compare is my question. How do I compare? I compare in two things. I already made that comparison today. I compare by subtraction. Why do I compare with subtracting? I compare with subtraction to see what is happening if I care about the scale. What do I do every day? I step on the scale pen. At the same time, after I do everything and before I have my coffee, what do I check? I check my weight. Why do I check my weight? Because I want to see from yesterday, higher, heavier, or not. What do? I subtract. And then I want to go on and I see, okay, this is how much my change is today. If I want to compare it, what was my weight last year? How much did I go down? Did I go 10% or I went 5%? This is the second way that I compare, by division. So I have two different comparisons. Absolute comparison is a subtraction. Relative comparison is a division. When I divide two things, what do I gain? And what do I lose? I lose the measurement because I don't have it anymore. I cannot compare pound by pounds by dividing. I lose the pounds. I cannot compare dollars by dividing. The dollars are cutting off. But what do I know? I know how much is changed. In other words, the percent change. And this is what I have here. I have the covariance related to standard deviations. My point is, do I have the same scale or not? Or in other words, what Mr. Sultan said before is standard deviation is the square root of the variance. The variance and the covariance are on the same scale. But when I have one standard deviation multiplied to another standard deviation, I get to the same scale that is my covariance. And what do I want to do? I want to see how two things are related. What's that concept? That's the covariance concept. As they change. But two things can change separately. And if they change separately, they can interact. What is the interaction? The multiplication. So if two things interact, being separate, and two things interact, being together, I want to see how they are related. And this is the idea that I have. So what is correlation? Correlation is how two things are related. Two things are related because they change. They can change being together, and they can change being separate. When one changes separately, interacts, in other words, multiplies with the other that changes separately, I know how they change separately. I know how they change together, and I find out how they are related. And that is the main idea that would help me to move on analyzing things in finance, knowing things in statistics. Is this clear? Kind of. And kind of. From kind of to become clear needs only one thing. Needs practice. I'm going to send you the video. You will have the video. You would look at it. You want to do practice. The only way you can practice is if you can see this graph. And you can see this graph for different stocks. And if you see things change, then you will have faith on that. Otherwise, don't bother. But the important point is, it's not as difficult as it seems, as long as you clarify things in your mind. I want you to watch the video from the first hour, watch the video from the second hour, and start making different graphs. Or have the graph here and put different data. Or don't do the same thing. Next time we're gonna put it in the computer or in the cell phone, one particular software that does it for you automatically. And we will move from that point on. We are in the chapter that is discussing risk. Personally, I like it and I don't like that particular chapter. It's better than most of the books, but it's not really perfect. Why it's good? Because it tells you how to do it using Excel. Why it's not perfect? Because it does not explain the process. And I want you to know the process. What do you do and why? I want all the questions to be answered related to the process. If we can be able to achieve that next week, we are fine. And then we can move on. As we move on, there is one more task to move on. This is like going hiking. Do you like going hiking? You go on and you get to the first peak, and you see then another peak there. What is happening? You need to go down and come up again. The next peak that we have, after we get the peak here, which is correlation, is the peak of regression. What is regression? We get that peak, then everything is going to be easy, because we're going to have the experience of how to analyze that stuff. And this is what I want you to do. As soon as I'm going to go to the office or later